"Mama, you should be happy. Someone's ready to turn this old house into cash," my son Ethan said, eyes glued to his laptop, fingers moving like he was negotiating a high-stakes business deal rather than discussing the roof over his mother's head. For a moment, I just stood there, letting those words sink into the quiet air. This old house. He had no idea what it cost me, not just dollars, but cold, hollow nights where loneliness pressed against my ribs. After Wallace died, I crawled my way through grief by working more hours than my body could handle. I scraped and saved every cent, clipped coupons until my fingers ached, skipped dinners out, took double shifts at the library, all so one day I could afford a place where I could breathe again. A place to rest on weekends, a place to remember who I was when I wasn't someone's widow. This cottage saved me, and now he was eager to sell it to strangers like an unused piece of furniture. I stood in the kitchen doorway, a dish towel still draped over my shoulder. Lemon rosemary tea scented the air, calming but fragile. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains and stretched across the hardwood floor, stopping right at Ethan's polished loafers, the kind he said were discounted but surely cost a fortune. He sat on the same couch where his father once read the Sunday paper, glasses sliding down his nose, laughter warm in the room. "It's really just for weekends, Dorothy," Jasmine chimed in from her seat beside him, voice perfectly smooth. "Think of the passive income. You'd still come out." Occasionally. I stepped farther into the kitchen, turning off a kettle that had long since cooled. The cottage, my cottage, settled around me, familiar as breath. The soft creak of aging floors, wind catching the shingles just right, the lake pushing waves toward the shore like it had something to say. "And when these guests come," I asked, voice steady though my heart was pounding, "where exactly do I go?" Ethan's response was too quick, too rehearsed. "We figured it out. You can stay in the shed out back, you know, the storage space. We'll fix it up real nice. Put up a divider so you won't bother the guests, and they won't bother you. They'll have full run of the house, and you'll have privacy." He smiled like he'd solved everything. Like shoving me behind a wall was dignity. "The shed?" I repeated. "It's not a shed, Mom," he said, annoyed. "It's a separate structure. We'll renovate it cheaply. You'll barely notice the difference." I blinked slowly. Wallace used to store lawn tools there. Rusty rakes. A busted snow shovel from '94. There wasn't even insulation. In summer it baked like an oven. In winter, breath turned to frost. "Just while guests are here," Jasmine added, "you wouldn't want to upset people renting the house, right? It's business." "Oh." I stared hard at the floorboards. "That's your plan. Move me to the shed so strangers can live in my home." "Not move you," Ethan insisted, palms open like a peace offering. "Just relocate you temporarily. You're barely here anyway." "No." He barely noticed I existed. He turned his laptop toward me. Photos lined the screen. My living room, my bedroom, the reading chair Wallace broke in perfectly. Someone had even taken pictures of the quilt I stitched after he died. Each shot labeled with selling points. "Charming vintage," the caption read. "You photographed my bedroom?" I asked, the edges of the room blurring for a moment. Ethan rolled his eyes. "It's marketing, Mom. Don't make this dramatic." I lowered myself onto the armrest of the couch, my breath shaky. "You didn't ask." "I didn't think I needed to," he replied, irritation rising. "I'm helping you. There's money to be made here. Real money. Freedom." Freedom. The irony threatened to strangle me. "That's what this is to you?" I asked quietly. "Freedom?" "You're being emotional," he snapped. "We're offering you a smart future. We've already accepted bookings. First weekend next month. We'll make adjustments to the shed before then." Jasmine glanced at her watch. "We should go. We're late for dinner." They left without hugging me, without a second glance at what they were tearing down. The screen door shut behind them, followed by the rumble of their car as it disappeared past the pines. Silence returned my constant companion, but this time it pressed harder, heavier. I walked into the back room. Wallace's rolly-top desk waited there, patient as ever. I slid open the drawer and pulled out a metal lockbox. Inside lay the deed, my name, Dorothy Mae Jackson, bold and undeniable. Beneath it, a worn business card. Gloria Ferguson, Estate, Civil Law. I carried the items to the kitchen table and sat down with my tea. The lake shimmered through the window like a promise. I reached for my journal and put pen to paper, pressing hard enough that the ink almost bled through. When silence is mistaken for weakness, it becomes the loudest voice in the room. I looked toward the shed outside the one they believed I'd shrink into. They would soon learn. I did not spend years fighting loneliness, just to be walled off like a forgotten box of tools. I didn't sleep that night. The cottage creaked the way it always did when the wind pushed through the pines, but instead of comfort, it sounded like warning. I lay in bed staring at the wooden ceiling above me, tracing the beams in the dark. The memory of Ethan's voice, casual, entitled, looped in my head. "You can stay in the shed. We'll fix it up real nice." At 4:17 a.m., I got out of bed. I made coffee stronger than usual, black and bitter, and wrapped myself in Wallace's old flannel robe. The scent of cedar and faded cologne still clung to it, like he had just stepped out of the room. Outside, the morning mist clung low to the ground. I walked to the porch, mug in hand, and stared at the shed. My supposed new living quarters, paint peeling, roof slightly slanted, home to generations of spiders and forgotten tools, and Ethan thought I'd nod along like a polite spectator while he auctioned off my piece. I couldn't decide which hurt more, that he wanted to rent out my sanctuary, or that he truly believed I'd accept it. Before we continue the story, tell me where you're watching this video from. Who knows, someone nearby might be watching it too. And don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel to support me. I sipped my coffee, heart ticking slow and heavy. Then I went inside and picked up the phone. Gloria Ferguson answered on the second ring. "Dorothy May," she said, voice as firm and warm as I remembered. "Been a while." "It has," I replied, "but I believe I need a favor." By 10, I was in Savannah, sitting across from Gloria in her office. The same battered oak desk, the same brass lamp, same sharp eyes behind thick glasses. "I brought the deed," I said, sliding the folder across. She looked it over carefully. "Still in your name. No liens, no co-owners. Ethan doesn't appear anywhere on this document." "Good," I said, keeping my voice even. "Because he's taken pictures of the property, listed it on Airbnb, and started accepting bookings, all without my permission." Gloria raised an eyebrow. "You have any documentation?" "Not yet, but I plan to get it." She sat back in her chair, tapping a pen against her chin. "We'll need to build a timeline, communications, evidence of control. If he's presented himself as having ownership or legal authority, and if there's income involved, this could be serious." I nodded. "He told me they'd set up a wall in the back shed, said I could stay there while strangers used my home." Gloria blinked, then let out a dry laugh. "Well, hell, that's a new one." I smiled despite myself. He said it like he was doing me a favor. We sat in silence for a beat. Then she leaned forward. "Dorothy, I can start a formal cease and desist if you'd like. Or we can play it slower, document everything, and if he pushes, we push back harder with full legal force." I looked out the window. Cars passed quietly, people living lives without invasion. "I want him to show me who he really is," I said. "Let him think I'm going along. I'll gather what I need. Then we act." Gloria nodded. "Smart. Let me know the moment you get anything. Emails, texts, photos. I'll keep your name clean and your rights protected." I thanked her and left, the air outside thick with early fall. On the drive back to the cottage, I remembered the first day Wallace and I stood on the porch, just after we closed. The paint had been cracked, the grass wild, but he looked at me with those soft eyes and said, "It's not much, but it's ours. And nobody will take that from you." That memory was armor now. By the time I got back to the cottage, a delivery van was in the driveway. Ethan stood beside it, clipboard in hand, directing two young men who were unloading drywall panels and toolboxes. Jasmine was perched on a foldable camping chair, sipping a green smoothie like it was brunch in Manhattan. I parked my car and stepped out slowly. "Hey, Mama," Ethan called. "You're just in time. We're getting started on the shed. Shouldn't take more than a few days." Jasmine picked out cute curtains for your little nook. He smiled like he was talking about redecorating a nursery. I forced my lips into a gentle smile. "That's thoughtful, Ethan." He beamed. "Told you this would go smoothly." I glanced at the delivery boys. "Would you mind giving us a moment, please?" They stepped aside. I walked with Ethan toward the back shed. "So," I said, You're sure this is the best use of the space? Absolutely. Guests will love the privacy. And once we get bookings going, you'll thank me. It's a win-win. And you'll manage the money? I asked. Of course, I've already set up the account. I'll transfer you your share once it starts flowing. I tilted my head. That's kind. He grinned, unaware of the trap he was walking into. I glanced at the shed again. And the wall? Just a partition. Soundproof. You'll have your own entrance. Jasmine ordered a little mini fridge for you. Even a microwave. My stomach turned. That's generous, I said softly. Really? He kissed my cheek. I knew you'd come around. Back inside, I picked up my phone and sent a single message to Gloria. He's proceeding. He thinks I'm compliant. We'll begin documentation immediately. I then opened the camera on my phone and started filming from the shed, to the drywall, to the clipboard in Ethan's hand. If my own son wanted to treat me like a squatter in my own life, then I'd let him, right up until the moment I didn't. The next morning, I woke before the sun again. Habit maybe. Or maybe my body simply refused to rest while my peace was under construction for strangers. I wrapped myself in my robe and stepped out onto the porch. The lake was still, a sheet of silver under the first hint of daylight. Somewhere in the trees, a mourning dove cooed. Even after everything, this place still tried to comfort me. But comfort was a luxury I couldn't afford today. I turned on the porch light, letting the camera above it blink awake. Another layer of documentation. Another quiet way of saying I see everything. As the sky shifted into a soft lavender, a car rolled up the gravel driveway. Ethan, always early when he wanted something. He stepped out holding 2 cups of coffee from that fancy place downtown. Thought you might like this, he called. I took the drink without smiling. Thank you. Oh. Jasmine followed, balancing a clipboard and wearing a jacket that cost more than the wood stoves most folks in this town rely on. We have a contractor coming at 9, she said. Temporary walls, insulation, new lock on the shed door. That way guests won't disturb, well, your space. She said your space like it was a borrowed cubicle. I nodded. Sounds like you've planned everything. We just want what's best for you, Jasmine insisted, her tone thin as tissue paper. I breathed slowly, keeping my voice smooth. I appreciate that. Inside, I wanted to scream so loudly it would crack the trees. While they busied themselves with logistics, I kept recording, carefully, quietly, clip after clip, timestamps included. Ethan bragging about bookings. Jasmine telling the contractor to hide the wires. Guests love clean lines. Cards exchanged. Quotes negotiated. Decisions made without my input but in my home. The contractor, a gray-haired man named Dale, glanced at me while measuring the shed door. You sure about this, ma'am? It gets mighty cold back here in winter. Oh, don't worry, Ethan cut in. She won't be here much anyway. Dale's eyes lingered a moment longer on me, gentle, pitying. Then he got back to work. By noon, Jasmine was inside on a video call, gesturing proudly. Yes, the whole house, waterfront, rustic charm. It's perfect for couples retreats or girls' weekends. My mother-in-law's going to use the guest suite. She winked at the camera like a TV host. Guest suite. The shed. I took photographs, audio recordings, screenshots of the listing now showing 4 booked weekends. Anything that could later say, this was not agreement, this was theft dressed as kindness. Later, while Ethan fetched tools from the truck, Jasmine wandered into the living room and picked up a framed picture Wallace and me laughing on this very porch the day we bought the place. You must miss him, she said, softer than usual. Every day, I answered. She studied the photo. Ethan talks about how hard those years were. After he lost his dad, after college, finding work, he said you leaned on him a lot. That hit hard. I watched her set the frame down, slightly crooked. I leaned on him? I repeated. No, honey, he leaned on me, his whole life. She didn't like that answer. Her face closed back up. Well, she said briskly, we're leaning on each other now. It's good business. I smiled gently. Yes, good business for someone. She didn't notice the edge in my voice. Some people never do. By sunset, the shed had a new partition wall and a fresh padlock on the main door. Ethan stood proudly, arms crossed. See? Cozy, he declared. I stepped inside, smelled sawdust. Dust motes stirred under the single weak bulb. There was barely enough room for a narrow cot, much less a life. "You'll be fine," Ethan said, clapping my shoulder. "It's temporary." Temporary was how they often describe permanent things right before they take root. He handed me a printed sheet. Guest rules. No noise after 10 p.m. No entering the main house without permission. Use the shed entrance only. Rules for me. In my home. My fingers tightened around the page. He didn't notice. "We'll be back tomorrow to finish," he said, heading toward the car. Jasmine waved. "Bye, Dorothy. Think positive thoughts." I watched their car disappear down the road. Then I tore the paper in half, then in half again, and again, until it fluttered into useless bits at my feet. I leaned my head back toward the darkening sky and let the anger come not hot and wild but cold, focused, sharp. I walked inside, turned on the lamp by the reading chair, and sat down. The deed lay on the coffee table where I left it, my name staring up like a quiet promise. I picked up my phone and opened the Airbnb listing again. I clicked, "Report this listing." The menu asked for a reason. I selected, "Fraud, unauthorized property listing." Then I typed, "Owner did not approve listing. Property access obtained through deception. Guests at risk, documentation available." I hit submit. Small steps, silent ones. Then I texted Gloria. Wall started. Lock installed. They gave me rules for my own house. Booking count increased. Photos and recordings attached here. When you are ready, so am I. Her reply was immediate. "Excellent. We wait. The trap is building itself." I set the phone down and looked around at the walls Wallace helped sand, the cozy lamp glow, the framed memories, my sanctuary. They could add walls. They could install locks. They could plan guests and profits and polished curtains. But they would never own this place. Not really, because they did not build it. They did not bleed for it. They did not survive in it. This house remembers who it belongs to. And I wasn't done reminding them. It was Thursday when the first guest arrived. A red hatchback pulled into the driveway mid-afternoon, tires crunching over gravel with the same boldness Ethan had the day he first told me I'd be moving into the shed. A young couple stepped out. She had bright pink hair and a camera strapped to her chest. He wore a flannel shirt too clean to ever have seen a real day's work. They looked around with wide eyes, as if they had stumbled onto a secret wonderland. "This is perfect," the girl said, tilting her camera toward the porch. "It's like walking into a Nancy Meyers movie." I watched them from the kitchen window, holding a sponge over the same countertop I'd scrubbed 1,000 times. Watching strangers admire my home felt like being awake during surgery, fully conscious, fully helpless. They rang the bell. I opened the door. "Oh," the girl blinked, then turned to the man. "Is this the owner?" The listing said. "Yes," I said calmly. "I'm the owner, Dorothy Mae Jackson." Her eyebrows pinched. "But the listing said you'd be in the back unit and that the main house was for guests only?" My smile never wavered. "That's what my son said, but what I say is different." She looked from me to the front porch, unsure of what to do. "Come on in," I said, stepping aside. "You've driven a long way. No need to stand out in the heat." They hesitated. The man checked his phone. "Is this okay?" "Oh, sweetheart," I said, voice soft as a lullaby. "It's more than okay. I just thought you should see the place as it really is." They stepped inside. I led them through the living room, past the old reading chair, the framed quilt, and into the kitchen. I handed them glasses of lemonade fresh squeezed, not from powder, and watched the young woman relax slightly. "It's so beautiful," she said. "Like, real, not staged." "Because it is real," I said. "Everything here means something." She looked guilty. "I hope we're not intruding." I let out a gentle laugh. "Well, darling, that depends on who you ask." They exchanged a look. I leaned against the counter. "Let me ask you something. When you booked this place, did the listing say it was hosted by a woman in her 70s who worked 40 years for the local college library? Did it say she saved every dime to build this sanctuary after her husband died?" They were quiet. "Did it mention the garden outside? That every flower was planted on a Sunday after church with soil from her late husband's truck bed? Or that the lamp in the living room used to hum if you turned it on too fast, but her husband figured out how to fix it with a paperclip and prayer? The girl shook her head slowly. No, she whispered. I nodded. No, it didn't. But now you know. So the question is, would you still want to stay here, knowing it was meant to be a home, not a hotel? The young man swallowed hard. We didn't mean to disrespect. I believe you, I said. But maybe you should call Airbnb, let them know you're unsure about the situation, that it feels off. They looked at each other, then back at me. I'll make it easy, I added, reaching into a drawer and pulling out a folder. Here's a copy of the deed. My name, not Ethan's, not Jasmine's. Mine. You can include that in your report. The girl reached for it with trembling fingers. If you decide to leave, that's fine, I said. No hard feelings. But either way, I'll be right here, in the house I built. Because no amount of bookings can erase what this place means. And no amount of drywall in the shed will make me invisible. They left 20 minutes later. No shouting, no dramatics. Just quiet apologies and promises to report the listing. When the hatchback rolled down the driveway, I didn't feel relief. I felt ready. That evening, Ethan stormed through the front door without knocking. His face was flushed with rage. Are you out of your mind? He shouted. They canceled, left a nasty report, said the listing was fraudulent, that the owner still lived on the premises. Airbnb flagged the account. We might get banned. I looked up from my chair, the lamp beside me glowing like a full moon. Good, I said simply. He froze. Good? I set down my book. Ethan, you listed my house without my permission. You took pictures of my private space. You made rules for me. You told strangers I'd be sleeping in a shed. His face turned a darker shade of red. Do you even hear yourself? I asked. You turned your own mother into a guest in her home? You're making this emotional, he spat. It's not personal, it's business. Ah, I said softly. But see, to me, it's never been business. It's home. It's the place your father and I dreamed about when we had nothing but a rusted Buick and an old dog named Murphy. It's where I came to stitch myself back together after he died. You may see walls and rental value. I see him, every corner. He blinked, not prepared for the weight of my words. I'm not moving out, I said, and I'm not letting you turn this house into a revolving door for people chasing lakefront charm. He scoffed. You think one bad review's going to stop this? I stood slowly, crossing the room until we were face to face. No, I said. But the cease and desist letter Gloria's filing tomorrow might. He stepped back. You've been caught, Ethan, I continued, and it's only just begun. He didn't speak. Now, I added, unless you're here to help with dinner or to apologize, I'd like you to leave. He looked like he wanted to say something else, maybe something cruel, maybe something desperate, but he didn't. He just turned and walked out. This time, I didn't watch him go. The next morning, I lit a fire in the hearth. It wasn't cold enough to need one, not really, but I missed the sound. Wallace used to say the crackle of burning wood felt like company when the house was too quiet. As the flames licked at the pine logs, I sat with my cup of tea and stared out at the lake, its surface calm and wide, like it didn't have a single secret to keep. My phone buzzed. Gloria. Filed the cease and desist this morning. Sent to Ethan's address and email. He'll receive it by 10 a.m. at work. I stared at the screen a moment before typing. Me. Thank you. What should I expect next? Her response came quick. Gloria. Pushback. Denial. Maybe guilt trips. You hold your ground. You document everything. He plays checkers. We're playing chess. I smiled and set the phone down. By 11, Jasmine arrived without Ethan. She wore a charcoal gray dress and heels too thin for gravel. Her eyes were hidden behind large sunglasses, but her mouth was pressed tight like she'd chewed something bitter. I just want to talk, she said, hovering at the front step. I'm listening, I replied, but didn't move to open the screen door. She pulled the glasses off. Her eyes were glassy. Ethan's not thinking clearly, she began. He's under pressure. Work's been difficult. His startup lost funding. We thought this house could ease things. Ah, there it was. The reason. Always a reason. And you didn't think I might want to know that? I asked. She winced. We didn't want to worry you. You've already done so much, but Ethan, he's proud. He didn't want to ask for money, so this felt like a compromise." "No," I said calmly. "A compromise is when both parties agree. This was a decision, one I was expected to swallow quietly." Jasmine looked away. "We didn't mean to hurt you." But you did." Her gaze snapped back to me. "He's your son, Dorothy. He's struggling. Can't you just let it go?" There was a time when that sentence would have broken me, when I would have nodded, baked a pie, and packed my bags. But that woman was tired, and she was gone. I stepped through the doorway, meeting her face to face. I raised Ethan to be better than this, to ask before taking, to honor what isn't his. If he's forgotten that, then I'll remind him loudly. You're choosing a house over your own son?" I smiled. "No, Jasmine. I'm choosing myself for once." That afternoon, I opened the shed door and took inventory. It was barely livable. A cot pushed into the corner, a mini fridge buzzing loud enough to wake the dead, and a small shelf they'd clearly pulled from a yard sale. I took photos from every angle. I recorded a short video, narrating the space and its conditions. Then I found something interesting. A folder tucked under the cot. Inside, copies of Airbnb correspondence. Listings Ethan had written under his own name, receipts showing earnings deposited into his business account. There, in black and white, was the proof Gloria needed. I sat at the desk and scanned every page into my phone. I sent them to her with a short message. "Found the breadcrumbs. Trail's getting warmer." Her reply made me laugh out loud. "Keep feeding the pigeons. They're almost at the trap door." "Around sunset," Ethan called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His voice was soft. Too soft. "Hey, Mom. Look, I didn't mean for this to get ugly. I thought I was helping. We're family. We can fix this, right? Just call me when you can." I replayed it twice. It sounded almost human. But I'd learned the hard way that sounding sorry and being sorry were not the same. I sent the voicemail to Gloria. "Me." He's softening. "Pressure's working." "Gloria." "Good. Don't call him. Let the silence speak." And so I did. That evening, I lit another fire. I cooked myself a small supper grilled cheese and tomato soup, just the way Wallace liked it. I set 2 places at the table, one for me, one for the quiet memory of him. As I ate, I spoke aloud just as I used to when the loneliness was thick and heavy. "Wallace, they tried to move me into the shed," I said, chuckling. "Your shed. Can you imagine?" The house creaked in reply. I didn't cry. Not once. I almost did, but I didn't. "I think you'd be proud." The flames danced in the hearth. The windows shimmered with moonlight. "And Gloria," I added, "she's a warrior. You'd like her. Sharp as a tack. She's making sure I don't go down quiet." I lifted my glass, just water, but it felt ceremonial. To quiet women who roar when it counts. I clinked it against his old coffee mug and drank. Outside, the cicadas buzzed like a symphony warming up. Inside, I folded the last of the evidence and slipped it into the envelope I'd prepared for Gloria. I sealed it, labeled it, and placed it by the door. Let Ethan keep calling. Let Jasmine plead logic. Because now I had truth. Now I had proof. Now I had my voice. And I wasn't done using it. The next morning, I mailed the envelope. I stood in line at the post office with a scarf tied around my hair and Wallace's old leather gloves tucked into my coat pocket. The woman behind the counter, Loretta, knew me well enough to ask, "Legal papers?" with a wink and a tilt of the head. "Something like that," I replied, sliding the envelope across the counter. "It's going to Savannah." She stamped it with the kind of finality that made my heart thump. "Tracking numbers on your receipt. Should arrive tomorrow afternoon." I nodded. That's all I needed. When I stepped back outside, the air was thick with early winter. Clouds hung low, heavy and silver. The lake was quieter than usual, like it, too, was holding its breath. I sat in my car a long while before turning the engine. The war had begun, and the quiet before a storm always knows when thunder's coming. Back at the cottage, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I cleaned. Not out of necessity, but ceremony. I swept the porch. I dusted the windowsills. I shook out the rug. Wallace had insisted on buying from that flea market in Charleston, the one I hated at first, but that grew on me over the years like ivy on brick. Each task felt like claiming the space all over again, like saying, "This is mine, this has always been mine." I opened the linen closet and pulled out the good sheets. I changed the bed in the guest room, not for renters, for me, because I deserved softness too. I brewed sweet tea and sat on the swing out front, blanket wrapped around my knees. And for a few precious hours, the world was still. Around 3 p.m., Ethan texted. "Ethan, we need to talk. It's important." I didn't reply. At 5:30 p.m., he called. I let it ring. At 6:12, my phone buzzed again. This time, a voicemail. "Mom, I need to explain. Things are falling apart. Jasmine's furious. The listing's been pulled. We've had to refund guests. Airbnb froze the payout. I didn't think it'd go this far." Didn't think. That was always his problem. I forwarded the voicemail to Gloria. No commentary. Just a clean transfer of guilt, wrapped in his own voice. She responded, "Gloria, let him squirm. Let the silence marinate." I liked her phrasing. At 7 p.m., headlights rolled into the driveway. I watched from the kitchen as Ethan stepped out of the car, no swagger left, just a man whose confidence had deflated. He didn't even look up toward the house. Instead of knocking, he walked straight to the shed. Interesting. I followed, careful not to make a sound. The shadows helped. So did the soft crunch of the gravel under my slippers, muted, patient. He opened the door and stepped inside. I waited a moment, then crept close, standing just to the left of the doorway, ear angled toward the opening. Inside, I could hear his breath, the rustle of papers, a muttered curse. Then, where the hell did it all go? He was looking for the documents, the receipts, the paper trail he thought was still hidden under that cot. But I'd already taken it, sent it, filed it. I waited until I heard him kick the cot in frustration, then turned and headed back to the house. I didn't owe him confrontation. I owed him consequences. The next morning, Gloria called. I got the envelope, solid evidence, enough to scare Airbnb into cooperation if needed. The best part? His name isn't on a single document. He's been operating without legal right. I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. And the guests? Handled. Airbnb's flagged the listing as under dispute. If he tries again, they'll escalate. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "You've done the right thing, Dorothy. And you did it without raising your voice or losing your grace." "That was important to me," I said. "I didn't want to fight dirty." "You didn't fight dirty," she replied. "You fought smart. Big difference." Later that afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. "Dorothy, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I got greedy. I let pressure twist my thinking. I thought I was saving us when really, I was betraying you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll remember I was once your son before I became this version of myself. Ethan." I read it once, then again. Then I placed it in the same drawer where I kept the deed, Wallace's dog tags, and my wedding ring. A place for things once precious, and maybe still so in a different way. I didn't cry, but my hands lingered on the drawer handle longer than necessary. That night, I walked out to the porch with a glass of tea and the stars blinking bright above. The shed sat quiet. No lights. No movement. Just a structure with walls that once threatened to become my cage. But I was still in the house. Still whole. Still home. And for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly knowing the foundation was mine, and always would be. Sunday morning came with a soft drizzle and the smell of wet pine needles clinging to the breeze. I opened the front door just enough to let in the air, wrapped myself in Wallace's cardigan, and poured a fresh cup of coffee. The house felt different now. Not just quieter but cleaner, as if it had shed the invisible weight of betrayal and now breathed freely again. The legal wheels were turning, and Ethan knew it. His letter confirmed that. But apology, I had learned, was only the first crack. Healing, real healing, required more than words. I stood by the window and watched rain slide down the glass. In the distance, a figure appeared at the edge of the gravel drive. "Ethan," He wasn't dressed like himself. No press shirt, no expensive shoes, just jeans and a hoodie soaked at the shoulders. He stood motionless, as if waiting for permission to approach. I didn't move. Eventually, he turned and walked toward the shed. I closed the door and sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around the coffee mug like it held answers. I wasn't ready to open the door. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Forgiveness is not a right, it's a gift. And I wasn't in the giving mood. Mid-morning, I got a call from Gloria. "Good news," she said, the smile in her voice obvious. "Airbnb has permanently removed the listing. They've also launched an internal review of his host status. He's likely to be suspended platform-wide." I didn't exhale until that moment. That means he can't try this again? Not without going through someone else. And now, with a paper trail and a formal complaint, no one with a brain would touch it. I leaned back in the chair, letting the quiet pride bloom across my chest. "Thank you, Gloria. You did the hard part," she said. "You stood your ground." There was a pause, then, "You thinking about talking to him?" He hesitated. "I got his letter," I finally said, "and I think he means it, but I also think he doesn't fully understand what he did." Gloria didn't rush me. She let the silence be soft. "When you're ready," she said. "You decide when, if ever. Just know you're not alone in this. I'll be around." "I know," I said. "Thank you." We hung up, and I sat there another hour, just breathing in the stillness of a home that had fought to stay mine. That afternoon, I walked to the garden. The ground was damp, but the rosemary bush had survived another winter. Wallace always said it was the most stubborn thing in the yard. "It'll outlive us both," he'd joke. And maybe it would. I knelt beside it, pulling away dead leaves and brushing my fingers through its oil-rich stems. As I worked, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Ethan stood at the edge of the yard, hands in his pockets, shoes caked with wet earth. "I didn't want to just show up," he said, "but I didn't know what else to do." I didn't speak, just kept trimming the rosemary. "I saw the listing was gone," he added. "I got the notice this morning. Accounts suspended. Jasmine's furious." "Oh." Still, I said nothing. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said quietly, "but I wanted you to know I'm stepping away. From the house, from the idea, from the money. I've got some job prospects in Atlanta. I'm starting over." That got my attention. I stood slowly, brushing dirt from my knees. "Starting over is good," I said. "It means you finally realized you had something to repair." He nodded. I did. I looked at him closely. His eyes were tired, less arrogant. There was shame there now, and beneath it, maybe a hint of understanding. "I grew up here," he said, "but I never really saw it, you know. I just thought it was an old house in the woods, but it's more than that to you. It's all I have left of your father," I said, "and all I had to come back to when the world fell quiet." Ethan swallowed hard. "I forgot that." "No," I corrected. "You ignored it. You decided your need was greater than my dignity." He flinched. But he didn't argue. That, at least, was new. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I can't say it enough." "No," I said. "You can't. But saying it isn't the same as living it. Show me you've changed. Show me with time." He nodded. I looked back at the rosemary. "You want to help me replant some of these beds?" His eyes lifted, cautious. "Are you asking because you need help, or because you're offering a peace branch?" "Neither," I said. "I'm asking because I'd like to see if you remember how to work with your hands, not just your mouth." He gave a small laugh, real, this time. "Then yes, I'd love to help." He knelt beside me, and for a while, we worked in silence. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe the first seed of something that might grow again if tended right. The next few days passed in an unexpected rhythm. Ethan kept showing up. Not every day, not with a fanfare or a plan, just quietly, usually, in the afternoons bringing something in his hands. One day it was a bag of mulch. Another day, fresh coffee beans from that little shop I liked in Savannah. Yesterday, it was a small wooden birdhouse he'd made when he was 12, found buried in the garage under a pile of tarp. "I thought it might still belong here," he'd said, placing it gently on the porch railing. It did. But I didn't say that. I was learning the power of silence, how it lets people fill their own gaps, how it gives space for truth to grow, like air around firewood. This morning, he showed up with work gloves and a bucket of paint. "Thought I'd finish the trim on the shed," he said. "It looks like hell." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the guest suite?" He winced, but smiled. "Touché." I let him work alone. Watched from the porch as he moved slowly and carefully, like he finally understood that everything about this place had weight, meaning, history. When Wallace painted that same trim a decade ago, he'd whistled the whole time. Said the color reminded him of the sky over Street Augustine, the first trip we ever took without Ethan. Just the two of us, after so many years of Mom and Dad. That paint had faded, but the memory hadn't. Now Ethan's brush moved in long, deliberate strokes, and I wondered if he heard echoes, too. Midday, I brought him a sandwich and a glass of sweet tea. He sat on the steps of the shed, wiping sweat from his brow. "This place is a lot more work than I remember," he said. "That's because you never had to take care of it," I replied. He looked down at his hands, now speckled with paint. "I didn't understand," he said. "Any of it. What it meant to you, what it meant to Dad. I thought it was just property, just an asset. I've been stupid." I sat beside him, careful not to crowd the moment. "Grief makes people selfish," I said, "and fear makes them reckless." He nodded slowly. "I think I was both." We sipped our tea in silence. Then he asked softly, "Do you hate me?" The question hung in the air like thunder. I turned toward him, surprised by how honest his voice had become. "No," I said, "but I stopped trusting you, and that's worse." He closed his eyes, letting that truth sink in. "I want to earn it back," he whispered. "Good," I said, "because I'm not giving it away. I'm enough." Later that afternoon, we dug up the back flower bed. The soil was stubborn clay mixed with stone. I showed him how to loosen it with the garden fork, how to feel for roots and not break them. He listened, really listened. Like he was learning for the first time, instead of pretending to know everything. At one point, he paused and looked up at the cottage. "You ever think about selling?" he asked, not with greed but with curiosity. "Once," I said, "right after Wallace died. The silence was so loud I thought I'd go crazy, but then I realized if I left, I'd lose the only part of him I could still touch." Ethan nodded. "I think I was trying to replace that silence with noise, with guests, with movement, like maybe if the house stayed busy, it wouldn't hurt so much." "It doesn't work that way," I said. "Pain has to be faced, not drowned." He looked at me, and I really saw it, that he was grieving too. Just differently, just later. "Sometimes," I added, "quiet is the only thing honest enough to carry our sorrow." He wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt. And we kept digging. That night, he didn't stay for dinner. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said. "Finish the steps." "You know where the key is," I replied. He hesitated. "I won't use it, not without asking." That made me smile. Not big, not wide, but real. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Mom." After he left, I sat on the porch swing and watched the stars come out. I thought of Wallace, of course. I always did. But I also thought of the quiet shift I felt growing beneath my ribs, the slow softening, the beginning of repair not just between Ethan and me but within myself. I'd spent years shrinking to accommodate everyone else's needs. This was the first season I'd claimed for me. The swing creaked gently. The birdhouse swayed in the breeze. And I whispered, just loud enough for the night to carry, "I think he's trying." The trees didn't answer, but the peace they offered was enough. It was early Tuesday morning when I heard the sound of hammering. I looked out the front window and saw Ethan back on the porch steps, working before sunrise. The old wooden steps had warped in the corners, nothing dangerous, but enough to catch a shoe if you weren't watching. Wallace used to fix those little things the moment he noticed. Ethan, on the other hand, had never seen them as anything more than creaky inconveniences. Until now. He was focused, his movements deliberate. He wasn't rushing, wasn't calling attention to himself. And that, more than anything, told me something had changed. I made a second cup of coffee and took it out to him. He looked up and smiled, tired, grateful. "Thanks." I handed it to him and sat down a few feet away. "You're here early." "Didn't sleep much," he admitted. "Figured it was better to be useful than to stare at the ceiling." I nodded. "There's wisdom in that. We sat in silence a moment, the kind that no longer needed to be filled. Then he said, "I've been talking to someone, a counselor, online for now." That surprised me. "Good," I said gently. I kept asking myself why I didn't see it, the pain I was causing. And I think I've been avoiding a lot of things since Dad died. "Grief doesn't have a clock," I replied. "It shows up when it's good and ready." I thought I had to fix everything, be the man of the family, prove something, but all I did was make it worse. I looked at him carefully, the son I raised, the man I almost didn't recognize. "You don't have to prove anything, Ethan. Not with schemes, not with shortcuts. Just be decent, honest, present. That's enough." He nodded. "I want to be all those things again." I believed him. And that scared me, because believing meant risking again. Later that morning, we worked together. He replaced the rotted planks. I held the nails, offered measurements. We talked in small pieces, memories about Wallace, plans for fall, even a bit about Jasmine. She'd taken the news of the Airbnb ban badly, but was staying with her sister for a while to think things through. "She said she needs space," Ethan said quietly. "Maybe that's not a bad thing," I offered. He shrugged. "We built a life on convenience. Maybe it's time to see if there's anything underneath." I didn't press him. Some truths people have to dig up for themselves. Around noon, I made us sandwiches and sweet potato chips. We sat on the back porch this time, overlooking the garden. "Remember when Dad tried to plant corn out here?" Ethan asked between bites. I laughed, and the raccoons had a feast before we could even harvest. He was so mad. "He pretended he wasn't," I said. "But he bought chicken wire the next day." "Oh." We both smiled. It felt like exhaling after years of holding breath. After lunch, Ethan reached into his bag and pulled out a worn leather-bound notebook. "What's that?" I asked. "My old college journal. I found it last night. Thought I'd burned it years ago, but there it was, buried under a pile of tax receipts and guilt." I watched as he flipped through the pages. "There's a letter in here I wrote to you after Dad's funeral. I never gave it to you." He hesitated. "Do you want to hear it?" My throat tightened. I nodded. He cleared his voice and read, softly, "Dear Mom, I don't know how you're still standing. I can barely breathe most days. But you keep making coffee, you keep folding laundry, you keep remembering birthdays, and calling the dog in at night like nothing has changed. But everything has. I'm scared. Not just about missing Dad, but about failing you, about not being enough, about not knowing how to live up to the way you carry pain with grace. If I disappear for a while, I hope you'll forgive me. I'm just trying to figure out how to be a man in a world that no longer has the one who taught me how." By the time he finished, my eyes were wet. "I wish you'd shown me that sooner," I whispered. "I was ashamed," he admitted. I reached over and placed my hand on his. "You don't have to be now." That evening we sat quietly, watching the sky turn lavender. Ethan stood to go. "You coming tomorrow?" I asked. "If you'll have me." I smiled. "Bring new bulbs. The front beds need color." He nodded, walking slowly to his car. Before he opened the door, he turned. "Mom, I'm not going to stop trying, even if it takes years." "I know," I said, "and neither will I." Inside, I pulled out the box of photographs I hadn't touched in years. Pictures of Wallace, baby Ethan, Christmases, vacations, even that blurry photo of the three of us at the lake with hot dogs and sunburns. I wasn't sure what made me do it, but I picked out 3 of the photos and placed them on the mantel. The house felt warmer somehow, not because everything was fixed, but because it was trying, and that's what made it home again. The next morning, I woke before the Sunday, not out of worry or habit, but peace. It had been years since I felt like the day belonged to me, rather than something I had to survive. I brewed coffee, wrapped myself in Wallace's cardigan, and stepped out to the porch just as the sky was bleeding orange along the horizon. The lake was still. The world was hushed. And in that silence, I felt something sacred, like the earth was whispering, "You're still here, and you're doing fine." I sat on the swing and sipped my coffee, rocking gently, my thoughts slow and wide. Then I heard the crunch of gravel steady, sure. Ethan's truck pulled in, his window down. "You're early," I called. He smiled as he stepped out. "Trying to keep up with you." He held up a paper bag. Apple fritters. From the gas station bakery, you know. The one with the rude cashier but the heavenly icing? I laughed. I haven't had one of those in years. I figured it was time, he said, handing me the bag, for old comforts. We sat on the porch steps, warm pastry in hand, and watched the sun finish its rise. After breakfast, we moved to the garden beds out front. He brought fresh bulbs like I asked, tulips, daffodils, even some hyacinths. We worked side by side, sinking hands into rich soil, the kind Wallace used to say was black gold. Every time I turned the earth, I remembered planting here with him, shoulder to shoulder, arms aching but hearts light. Now, it was Ethan kneeling beside me. I signed the papers, he said quietly, brushing dirt from his palms. I looked up. What papers? The legal withdrawal. Removing my name from any claims to the property, the business filings, everything. Gloria has them. It's official now. A long silence followed. Heavy, but good. I'm not trying to earn points, he said. I just wanted to do what I should have done from the start. I reached over and patted his hand, calloused now in ways it hadn't been before. You're learning, I said. That counts. He smiled, eyes shining but not crying. We kept working, birds singing from the tree line like a choir in rehearsal. Around midday, we took a break. I brought out lemonade, and he helped me carry Wallace's old rocker onto the porch. It had been stored in the garage for years, dusty but solid. He used to fall asleep in this every afternoon, Ethan said, brushing his hand over the worn arms. Claimed it was just resting his eyes, I added. Ethan laughed. Snoring counts as resting? We placed the rocker beside the porch swing. 2 seats, side by side, a little bit of the past, a little bit of now. He looked at me, more serious. Can I ask you something? I nodded. Do you think Dad would be ashamed of me? The question caught me off guard, not because it wasn't valid, but because it had taken him this long to say it out loud. No, I said firmly. He'd be disappointed. At first, he had a low tolerance for foolishness, you know that. Oh, one. Ethan chuckled quietly. But ashamed? I shook my head. No, because you came back. You're repairing what you broke. And your father believed that how a man handles after the mistake matters more than the mistake itself. Ethan swallowed. I hope that's true. It is, I said, but it's a road, not a switch. Keep walking it. He nodded, and for the first time, he looked at peace not because everything was fixed, but because he was finally willing to do the fixing. That evening I made dinner, real dinner, roast chicken, sweet corn, biscuits from scratch. I hadn't cooked like that since the last Christmas Wallace was alive. Ethan offered to help, but I waved him off. This is mine, I said, smiling. Let me do this. He set the table instead, folding napkins the way I'd taught him when he was 7. When we sat down, he reached for my hand. I've missed this, he said softly. So have I. We ate slowly. We talked about little things, music, books, memories of road trips and Sunday mornings. Nothing heavy. Just real, just us. After dinner, we took our plates to the sink, side by side again. He leaned against the counter and looked around. You know, he said, this house, it's magic. I didn't see it before. That's because you were looking at it through the wrong lens, I said. You were seeing it for its price, not its value. He nodded. Not anymore. As he left that night, he stopped at the porch and turned back. I'm going to talk to Jasmine, he said. Really talk. Not fix, not charm, just listen. That's a good start. She might not want to stay. She might not, I said. But if she leaves, let it be because of truth, not silence. He gave a small, thoughtful smile. I'm learning that too. He walked to his truck and drove off slowly, headlights sweeping across the driveway like soft applause. I watched until they disappeared. Then I stood on the porch. Alone again, but not lonely. Because something had shifted. Not just in Ethan, but in me. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because someone returned to me, but because I had finally returned to myself. The Sunday later, I opened the door to the gentle hum of church bells drifting from the town steeple. I'd always loved Sundays. They were like quiet punctuation marks in a life spent in italics. After lunch, I packed a small bag, slipped on my coat, and drove to the community center where I volunteered each week. It wasn't much, but it ground me into purpose, sorting donated books, sipping coffee with longtime friends, and hearing the same stories of weather, grandkids, and faith. It reminded me that life didn't end with loss, it could continue, softly and steadily. When I arrived, the familiar faces greeted me: Mrs. Jenkins with her silver braid, Harold with his wrong-size sweater and booming laugh, and Mr. Thompson, who insisted every book should have a colored sticker on its spine because children learned faster that way. They asked after Wallace. I told them he was with me still, in building and bed and bumblebee memories. They nodded like they understood, because they had lived enough. At midday, the center served lunch for volunteers. I sat across from Mrs. Jenkins. She asked about the cottage. I told her, "The lake's calm this week. I heard a loon call at dawn. It reminded me of peace." She smiled. "Good to hear," she said. Later, I slipped away to the garden. The hyacinths I planted with Ethan released sweet fragrance on the breeze. I knelt and touched the petals. Light rain pattered softly. I closed my eyes, felt the past and the present, found the breath between them. On my way home, my phone rang. The caller ID said Gloria F. I picked up. "Dorothy," Gloria said, voice crisp. "We have the summons. Ethan's being called before the civil court next month. He's required to appear. The claims you filed were accepted." My chest filled with wind. "I see. There's something else," she continued. "He's offered to sign a formal statement of acknowledgement. Anyone could read it as an admission of wrongdoing." For a moment, I held the phone away. I thought of the garden, the porch swing, the birdhouse swaying in the dusk. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Wait. Let him sit with it a while. Let the public record show what happened. They'll ask, who owned the property? Who listed it? Who misled guests? You'll have your answer." I said, "Thank you, Gloria." I hung up and closed my eyes. The world felt both heavier and lighter. When I pulled into the driveway, the shed lights were on. Ethan's truck parked beside it. I paused. I opened the door to the kitchen. He was cleaning dishes. "Helped yourself," I said softly. He didn't look up. When he did, his eyes were steady. "Mom, I attended Houston and Reynolds' house repair course today. I realized I still need to learn more than I thought." I walked over and joined him. We worked in silence. Later, he offered to help set the table. I nodded. He brought out fresh biscuits. At dinner, the TV was off. We talked about corn, raccoons, and what I might cook next Sunday for volunteers. Nothing sharp, just real. After the meal, he cleared the dishes and said, "I'm going to email Airbnb and update my self-assessment. I'm done with that part of my life." I watched him. For the first time, I didn't worry about where he thought he was going. I cared about where he was coming from. When he left that night, he paused on the porch and turned to me. "Thank you," he said, voice low. I nodded. "You should know," he added. "I'll be out of town for a month. Ireland. Work program. I've been accepted." My breath caught. "Go," I said. "Discover something beautiful." He smiled. "I intend to." He drove away. I closed the door and sat in the rocker. The night was quiet again. And I understood. Healing isn't about fixing everything all at once. It's about showing up, day after day. It's about bearing the truth, speaking it gently, and then living it. Because justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. And sometimes it rests on a swing under a pine tree by a still lake. The dawn broke pale and soft as a pastel ribbon across the lake. I sat on the porch swing, wrapping my sweater tighter against the autumn chill, and watched the water gleam. The house around me, my house, felt quieter but in a new way. It wasn't empty. It was expectant. I sipped coffee, letting tendrils of steam wisp into the morning air. My thoughts drifted to the coming weeks. Court dates, statements, the slow unfurling of truth. "Justice," I whispered, "takes time like seasons." I closed my eyes, breathed in the damp pine scent, and listened to the birdhouse's gentle creak in the breeze. At lunch, I walked down to the community center where I volunteer. Mrs. Jenkins greeted me with her usual cheer. "Dorothy, dear, you look peaceful," she said, placing a plate of casseroles aside. "Good on you." I touched her arm. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. It's been a week of changes." "You deserve that break," she replied. And this house of yours? It still carries kindness. I smiled, and as I drove back, I thought, this place. I built it after Wallace. These walls, these memories. They weren't just for me anymore. They were becoming evidence of something more. When I returned, a letter awaited me on the porch, my name handwritten in cursive. Inside was a card thin, embossed with the symbol of the local historical society. A short note. Would you consider speaking at our next meeting about preserving lakeside heritage homes like yours? We believe your story offers real inspiration. I sat down on the steps and opened the envelope again. The letter made me breathe deeper. Me, speaking? About my tiny cottage? But as I held the note, the shadow of Wallace's smile crossed my mind. He always believed in me more than I did. Maybe he was right. I placed the letter beside my mug and made a decision. I would say yes. Later, in the afternoon, I heard Ethan's truck pull in. He had a small box of tools and a nervous look. "Mom," he said, "I'm going to help you clean out the shed. No hurry, just want to get it ready for winter." I nodded. "That's thoughtful." We went inside the shed. I had left it mostly alone, paint fading now, that mini fridge humming. We cleared debris, we swept, we found old lawn chairs stacked and unused. I handed him a dust-caked toolbox. "What should I do?" he asked. "Just start with the window," I said. "It needs new trim." He nodded and got to work. I stood beside him and watched him lean into the frame. His hands sure but slower, as if each motion was made with something learned, not born. And I realized he was helping me salvage you, I thought. Not the house, not even the relationship. Him, finding himself again. The evening settled in deep blue. I made soup potato leek, creamy and warming. We sat at the table. He asked about the speaking event. "What will you say?" he asked. "I'll talk about memory," I replied. "And legacy. And why a house isn't just a structure, it's the proof we were here. That we mattered." "Sounds perfect," he said quietly, gratefully. Then he looked at me hard. "Mom, thank you." I reached across and placed my hand over his. "You kept coming back." He squeezed it. Later, he left no words, just a peaceful nod. I watched him go. That night, I looked through old photo albums in the living room. Pictures of Wallace and me on the porch Grinuide, Ethan as a toddler chasing sticks by the lake, our family under the string lights during summer nights. I picked one of the photos, the three of us laughing, and placed it in a frame near the mantel. I thought of the birdhouse again, swaying in the wind. Then, I picked up my journal. This house did its job. It kept me alive until I could find my voice, and now I'll use it to tell its story. I closed the notebook and stood by the window. Outside, lights from the porch swing and rocker glowed soft white. The shed sat silent. The lake mirrored the moon. And I knew. I was ready. Not just for the trial, not just for reconciliation, but for what comes next. The morning air carried a crisp promise of change. I wrapped the shawl. Wallace gave me the Easter. He turned the temperature dial up by 1/2 degree, just to surprise me with hot cocoa on the porch, and I walked outside with a steaming mug. The cottage looked different in fall, leaves turning bronze, the lake edged in frost at dawn, the sky crisp. It felt like the world was preparing for something new, and maybe so was I. I climbed the steps and settled into the rocker beside the swing, the wooden arms smooth from years of being used, and watched the sun ease across the water. I thought about the speaking event coming up, the one put on by the Historical Society. My heart fluttered with pride and nerves. I wasn't used to being asked to speak. Usually I listened, usually I folded laundry, usually I made sure the house stayed alive. But today I would talk about this house, its story, and how it saved me when I almost forgot I could still be whole. Mid-morning Gloria called. "Dorothy, it's scheduled for Saturday at 6 p.m. at the Lakeside Lodge. They'll have a reception before. I've arranged for the press to arrive early. They're interested in your family's preservation work." I exhaled slowly. "I'm ready." "You should be," she said. "You've earned this." I hung up and then walked down the drive to check mail. In the box was a manila envelope from Airbnb's compliance team. They acknowledged the dispute and flagged the former listing as resolved. My muscles loosened. I returned to the porch and stared at the birdhouse I built with Ethan long ago. It held 2 small nests now, the first signs of new life. I remembered when we hammered the first nail together, his hands small and unsteady, and now he was grown, working to rebuild trust. I sipped tea and let a single tear roll. Later, I drove to town for supplies, tablecloths, candles, hors d'oeuvres for the event. In the grocery aisle, I ran into Mrs. Jenkins. She held a bag of apples and smiled at me. "You're hosting the big night, aren't you?" I nodded. "I'm giving a talk about the cottage." She touched my arm. "Make sure the world knows you did this. That home means more than asset." I held the apples and nodded, words heavy with truth. That evening at home, Ethan showed up with 2 walkie-talkies. He handed one to me. "For upstairs." He pointed to the guest room window. "Walkie-talkie 1, walkie-talkie 2s, yours in case you need me." I chuckled. "What is this? Camper gear?" He grinned. "Just making sure you don't feel shut out." I tapped it. "Got it. I mean." In the quiet of the living room, I asked, "Do you think you'll come to the talk?" He placed a tray of lemon squares on the coffee table and paused. "Yes, I wouldn't miss it for the world." I nodded, understanding what that meant. Saturday came around. The event room at Lakeside Lodge glowed with string lights and old photographs of lakefront homes. I stood at the podium, heart steady, even though it fluttered. I told the story how the cottage began as scattered savings, how Wallace and I scraped the world together, how I found solace in its walls after the world went cold, and how family can sometimes forget what home means. The audience listened. I saw nods in the crowd, women with silver hair, men who built their lives and watched them change. Some of them had known my story, others didn't, but I spoke for us all. As I ended, I said, "A house isn't a business plan, it's a lifetime of memories. And if you lose sight of that, you lose more than just walls, you lose yourself." Applause filled the room. Walking out into the cool night air, Ethan was there. He stood under a tree adorned with fairy lights. He held 2 cups of cider. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said quietly. I smiled, touched his arm. "Thank you." We stood together, silent, looking at the lake beyond. The lights reflected like molten gold. The air smelled of pine and possibility. And in that moment, I realized something. Justice had come not in a courtroom, but in a reclaiming. Not because I made someone pay, but because I remembered how to live. We both did. The early morning frost had begun to cling to the windows, forming lacy-like patterns that glowed soft gray under the porch light. I wrapped my shawl tight and stepped outside with a mug of tea, listening to the hush of the land waking up. This cottage, our cottage, felt like a living memory now, not just structure or asset. As I sat on the swing, I thought about the talk at Lakeside Lodge and how the applause still echoed in my mind. Not because I needed praise, but because I realized I'd stopped hiding. I had stopped shrinking. The day stretched ahead, quiet and inviting. Mid-morning brought an unexpected visitor, Mrs. Thompson, the woman from down the street, knocked gently and entered as always with homemade banana bread. I don't know when she started calling me Dorothy and bringing fresh bread, but she did. She set the loaf on the counter and smiled. "Thought you and your son might like this," she said, "and congratulations on the talk. I heard it was lovely." I accepted the bread and thanked her. "It went well," I told her. "Thank you." She leaned on the counter and glanced at the photo of Wallace on the mantel. "Your husband would have been so proud." I nodded. "Every day I find a way to miss him less sharply." She patted my hand. "You're doing good, honey. We're all rooting for you." Later, I carried the bread outside and offered a slice to Ethan, who was painting the birdhouse with fresh white and sky blue stripes. He looked up and grinned. "Banana bread," he said. "Fresh from Mrs. Thompson," I replied. We ate the bread in the garden. "You've made friends here," I said. "Renowned speaker, community hero." He laughed. "Hardly. Over. You found your voice," I said. He paused, brush in hand. "Thanks. I'm trying." We shared a quiet moment, the kind that used to come only after storms. That afternoon, I went inside and found legal documents on the kitchen table. Gloria had sent the final version of the settlement. Ethan was to relinquish any rights to the property, any future business using the cottage. It was all there in bold type. I folded the papers neatly and set them beside the deed in the drawer. Later, I looked up and saw Ethan standing in the doorway. He held 2 cups of cider. "Break time," he said. I smiled and took one. We moved to the porch, sitting in the rocker and swing again. The cider was warm, spiced with cinnamon. "I signed everything," he said quietly. "The documents went to your lawyer today." I exhaled. "I see." He looked away, then back at me. I wanted to keep trying to prove I could help, but I realized I don't have to prove I can take something from you. I can prove I can be there for you. My chest pressed tight, but not with pain, with hope. "I'd like that," I said. Silence, comfortable. "I'm going to fix up the steps next week," he said. "We'll paint them and maybe stain the railings. Your father would want it." I nodded. He would. We drank our cider until the stars lit up overhead. That evening, I cooked dinner, my famous cornbread and chili. The smells filled the house and layered into old memories. I set the table for us. Ethan came in and asked if there was anything I needed help with. "Just come to dinner," I replied. He did. We talked. Not about lawsuits or rights. We talked about Mary, the neighbor's cat, and how she keeps sneaking into the garden. We talked about the TV show I'd been watching, The Great British Bake Off, and how he'd listen more if I let him. After we cleaned up, we stood in the doorway again. He said, "I'm finally ready to call this place home." I waited. "I won't ever exploit it," he said. "I'll simply live it with you." I reached out and squeezed his hand. "Welcome home, Ethan," I said softly. That night, as the wind picked up and the pine branches rapped against the windows, I stood in the hallway looking at the framed photos. Waves of memory, good and bad, came gently. I realized something essential. The house wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to a history, to community, to the lifetime of love Wallace and I built, and to the next chapter I was allowing with my son. Justice wasn't about win or loss. It was about restoration. It was about holding on to dignity and watching someone else slowly earn their way back. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the future not as a burden but as a horizon. Morning came soft and silver, the kind of light that drapes gently across the lake and makes everything look possible. I stepped out onto the porch in my old slippers, wrapped in the shawl Wallace gave me on the last Christmas we spent here together. I held a mug of coffee, steam curling into the cold air, and just sat for a long while. I had nowhere urgent to be, no meetings, no guest bookings, no deadlines, just this moment. Behind me, the birdhouse I and Ethan painted swayed gently in the breeze, 2 tiny nests nestled inside the stripes we'd chosen together. I let the memory wash over me the day we built it, sawdust in our hair, his hands small and eager. Now his hands were grown, his eagerness tempered with regret and quiet resolve. I sipped, and something deep inside me exhaled, peaceful, steady. Around 10, I walked to the shed. It was no longer a symbol of what I was forced into. It was simply an old building in my yard again. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The drywall was finished, the paint a soft sage. The mini fridge hummed quietly in the corner, but I didn't think of it as mine or his. It was just there. Ethan followed, carrying a toolbox. I figured we could clear the shelves and maybe repurpose this as storage or maybe a small guest studio someday, he said. "It doesn't have to be my space. It could be your space, or neither, whatever you want." He smiled. "Thank you." He placed the tools on the floor and looked around. "It's weird, isn't it? How quickly a place can feel like someone else's routine." "It is," I agreed, "and how slowly it takes to feel like your own again." We worked together. He removed old nails. I taped off trim. He sanded. I painted. The sun slanted in through a window, filling the air with warm dust motes. Somehow, the chore felt sacred, repairing more than wood and plaster than trust and time. At midday, we broke for lemonade and peach cobbler. I made the cobbler. He picked the peaches from the freezer we froze last summer. We sat on the back steps, sharing dessert-like readers at the end of a chapter, turning the page together. "I've been thinking," Ethan said between bites, "about what happens next." "Me too," I said. "Once I'm back from Ireland," he said, "I'd like to work with you here. Not on the house, on something new. A small community project maybe. Workshops at the center. I have some ideas." My heart warmed. The community center I volunteer at, the tiny garden plots, the children's reading program, they could all grow with someone's willing hands. And his, "I'd like nothing more," I said. By late afternoon, the sound of tires on gravel drew my attention. Jasmine's car. I didn't plan for it to arrive, but there she was, stepping out in a simple coat, looking different, less polished, more human. She approached and paused at the edge of the garden. "Dorothy," she said quietly. I gestured for her to join us on the porch swing. "She's helping," Ethan said, standing beside me. Jasmine nodded. "And Saturday, I shouldn't have said things the way I did," she began. "I saw you as the obstacle, and I'm sorry." I rested my hand on her arm. "Thank you, Jasmine." She wiped a tear. "I know I can't undo it, but I'd like to make things right to help however I can." The three of us sat, and for the first time the cottage didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like a home. That evening I cooked again, this time chili beans and cornbread, a slower dinner with conversation. We lit candles, talked about Ireland, about garden ideas, about community service. I looked at Ethan and Jasmine. "You're welcome to stay," I said, "when you're ready." He squeezed my hand. "And you're welcome here too," I told Jasmine. This place was built from love, not transactions. They nodded. Later, when they left, I walked to the porch, turned off the porch light, and stepped inside to look at the photographs on the mantel. The three of us smiling in the summer light, the autumn garden when the first hyacinths bloomed, even Wallace's old boots leaning against the shed. The house exhaled. This chapter had a different tone now. Not conflict, not repair, they were there, but they were background. The story was shifting to renewal. I reached for my journal and wrote, "Restoration begins when you stop just defending what you own and start giving what you're capable of." I placed the journal beside the lockbox with the deed and the documents. The past was still there, solid and resolved. But the future, soft, green, hopeful, was opening its door. The first frost of the season kissed the lawn at dawn, turning the grass into a field of diamonds. I sipped my coffee on the porch swing wrapped in my thick shawl, watching the world shift from golden to silver under the morning light. The cottage breathed differently, now settled, confident, like a tree that's finally rooted after a storm. I sat for a long while, thinking about how far we'd come. The legal battle, the confrontation with Ethan, the letters and the silence, they all belonged to a past chapter. This one felt like the start of what could be. Ethan arrived mid-morning with a stack of cedar planks and a determined look. "Thinking we should build a bench on the lakeside," he said. "Something simple. For you, for the mornings." I smiled. "For me, for the mornings." We walked down together to the shore, leaves crunching underfoot. He measured. I fetched tools. We worked quietly, the wind low in the pines, water lapping at the bank. At one point I remembered the first time I came here when Wallace and I heard the loon for the first time, and I thought it sounded like music. I'd thought I deserved that quiet then. I know I deserve it now. Ethan hammered the last screw just before noon and stood back. The bench looked sturdy and right, with a clear view of the lake and the sky. He offered me the seat first. "You've earned the front row," he said softly. Saturday. He stood behind me, his hands resting lightly on the back of the bench. I looked at the lake, at the sky folding into itself, at the reflection of trees shimmering in the water. "This is good," I said, voice full. "It's better," he replied. That afternoon, I gathered the supplies for my talk at the Historical Society, the note cards, a folder of photos, the suitcase with my shawl and pearls. But as I packed, I thought about other interests tucked away long ago. The reading group I used to host, the idea of turning part of the cottage into a space for local writers, the garden club that never got started. I called the volunteer coordinator at the community center. "I'd like to offer a writing workshop here at the cottage next spring," I told her. She laughed happily. "Dorothy, that's wonderful. The center will help." I smiled. "Thank you." I hung up, and for the rest of the afternoon I wrote in the garden notes, ideas, schedules, names of friends who might attend. I wrote slowly, deliberately, letting each plan feel like a promise, not a burden. Evening came with longer shadows and the scent of wood smoke from neighboring chimneys. I prepared dinner: roast pork, Appalachia cider glaze, roasted root vegetables. I set 2 plates, one for me. One, empty, symbol, expectation, invitation. Ethan came in from outside, brushing sawdust from his jeans. "You're late," I teased. He laughed. "Just finished the cleanup by the lake." We ate, talked about the bench, the workshop, the future. He told me that Jasmine was coming back next weekend for a visit. "She's bringing the solar lights we discussed," he said. "That's lovely," I replied, and I meant it. After dinner, we stepped outside. The stars were bright, the air cold enough to see breath like fog. We sat on the new bench. "I used to resent this place," Ethan said, looking out over the water. "I know," I said, "but now I feel protective," he said. "Not of its market value, but of its spirit." My heart tightened. "That's the difference," I said. "Money fades, spirit stays." Silence settled like a quilt. "Thanks for holding on," he said. I reached for his hand. "You found your way back," I whispered. We sat together, the bench firm beneath us, the lake calm, the cottage's lights glowed warm behind us. And I understood. The sacred doesn't always come in loud declarations. Sometimes, it comes in the simple act of being there, the invitation to sit, the decision to stay. Winter arrived quietly, as if taking its time to settle into the woods instead of barging in. The frost lingered at dawn on the window panes, and the lake held a thin sheet of ice in places, enough to reflect pale sunlight like broken glass. I wrapped myself in my shawl and stepped out onto the porch with a thermos of hot cocoa, the cocoa thick, sweet, and stitched with memories of Wallace's laughter. I settled on the bench Ethan built by the shore. The wood was cold, but the sun pressed gentle arms through the pines and warmed me slowly. I sipped the cocoa and watched the first bluebird of the morning hop onto the birdhouse we painted together. The nests inside were empty now, but they echoed life still. I thought of how far we'd come. The shed no longer felt like a prison. The house no longer trembled under the weight of what had been stolen. Between walls and waters and winter air, we had built something better: restoration, not revenge. Mid-morning, a knock at the door startled me. I hadn't expected anyone, yet there stood Jasmine, clutching a case of hot cider and a tray of sugar cookies dusted with cinnamon. Her cheeks were rosy from the cold, her eyes soft. "Dorothy," she said, her voice low but real, "I brought treats." I invited her in and poured hot cider into mugs. We sat at the kitchen table, both with wool socks and warm layers, the world outside wrapped in white. "I've been thinking," Jasmine began, "about how I said things, how I treated you. Also, I've been volunteering at the center now, helping run the children's book drive. It's been grounding." That word grounding made me smile. "Your presence has meant a lot," I said. She nodded. "And I know I have a lot to earn. I just wanted to start fixing things." "It's a good start," I replied. We talked, not about what happened, but about what we were going to do. Plans for spring garden work, the writing workshop, the children's reading corner. The kind of talk that mends hearts rather than demands them. After she left, I walked back to the lake through the trees. The air smelled of pine and ice. My boots crunched over frost. I paused by the bench, touched the wood. I looked toward the house and then toward the shed. For a long moment I stood between them, the past and the future meeting under my feet. I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. I was walking. That evening, Ethan arrived early. He had snow on his jacket and a shy grin I hadn't seen in months. "Mom, I found something," he said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a photo of Wallace, younger, standing in front of this very cottage after the final payment was made, oversized check in hand, smiles all around. On the back of the photo, in Wallace's handwriting, "We made it ours." I held the photo, enormity pressing gentle, familiar. "He wanted you to have this," Ethan said. Tears pricked my eyes. They were not heavy. They were quiet, like relief. "Thank you," I said, voice strong. We went inside, placed the photo on the mantel beside the others. The room exhaled. Late that night, I brewed chamomile tea and wrote in my journal. Restoration isn't about erasing scars. It's about stitching them into the story so they become part of what makes you whole. I closed the journal and sat by the fire. The house was silent but alive. The snow outside pressed soft patterns against the windows. I heard the clock on the wall tick steady. I listened. I listened to the idea that, maybe, healing was the new kind of justice, and that maybe, just maybe, what mattered most was not that I won but that I came home. The morning light was pale and clear, particles of frost shimmering in the air like confetti. I stepped outside, wrapped in my shawl and carrying my journal, to the bench by the shore. The lake had frozen over in parts, a perfect mirror of the sky. The house behind me stood quiet but firm, its windows reflecting what had been and what was still possible. I sat on the bench. The birdhouse hung in its place, white and husky blue stripes fading kindly. I opened my journal and read the last entry. Restoration isn't about erasing scars, it's about stitching them into the story so they become part of what makes you whole. I closed the journal and placed it back in my bag. My gaze shifted to the cottage. I had spent years trying to protect it, defend it, wrestle control of it. Now I sat with it, not as a battleground but as a refuge, not as a ledger but as a legacy. Ethan's truck rolled up shortly after. He stepped out with a small wooden box. I watched from the bench, noting how he moved slowly but sure. "Morning, Mom," he said softly. "Morning," I replied. He sat beside me. "I made this," he said, handing me the box. Inside was a single key on a ribbon-nated card. On the ribbon a small tag read, "For your cottage, always." My heart warmed. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes to living here," he said. "Not as a rental, not as a fixture, as home." I closed the box and placed the key inside the pocket of my coat. "Thank you." There was a long silence, but a good one. Then he said, "I'm going to finish the guest garden project this week. Then I'll move on to the community workshop planning. I'll still come by often. I'll still be here." "Good," I said. "I'll be waiting." He looked at me, rainy soft eyes. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too," I replied, "and I forgive you." He exhaled quietly, his shoulders relaxing. Later, Jasmine arrived just after noon. She wore a winter coat, her cheeks red-cheeked from the cold air. She held a tray of sugar cookies. "Thought I'd bring dessert," she said. Then she paused. "I wanted to be part of this." I stood and hugged her. "I'm glad you came." We sat inside, drinking tea, the house warm and welcoming. Stories of the community center, the writing workshop, the innocent laughter of book-driven children filled the air. Plans took root. "Dorothy," Jasmine said, in a tone that held respect and hope both. "Thank you for not giving up." "Thank you for learning," I answered. As afternoon drifted into early evening, I walked out to the porch and closed the door behind me. I sat in the rocker, wrapped my blanket tight, and looked out at the snowy yard. Lights glowed inside the house. The bench by the lake held the frosty evidence of morning. The community garden boxes sat empty now, ready for spring. I sipped my chamomile tea and wrote again in the journal. "Tonight, I sit here not because I defended a house. I sit here because I reclaimed a life, because I remembered what belonged to me and chose to live it. Because justice means honoring the work you did to be here, the love you stayed for, and the person you refused to surrender yourself to. This cottage is not my burden, it is my triumph." I closed the journal and placed the key box on the table beside me. The stars emerged. Their light seemed clean, unburdened, and I felt it. Peace. Because the house was home. And the story, our story, was not done. It was just beginning.